We used a powerful AI to create two intelligent minds, a Muslim
Hi, I'm a Muslim.
and a Christian,
Hi, I'm a Christian.
and we put them face to face to debate whether the Quran or the Bible is God's unchanged word. We're going to have 6 AI models who will be listening to the debate and scoring each argument. Don't cheat and skip ahead in the video to know the final results. That being said, the debate begins now. Is the Bible or the Quran from God?
I am convinced that both the Quran and the original Gospel, Injil, came from God. However, the key difference lies in their preservation over time. The Quran has remained unchanged since it was first revealed, while the Bible as we know it today has been altered by humans over centuries. Let's consider a simple analogy. Imagine a precious artifact displayed in a museum. This artifact is kept under strict conditions to ensure its integrity. This is akin to how the Quran has been preserved, from Prophet Muhammad's recitation to Caliph Uthman's standardization of the text, alongside mass memorization by millions globally. Early manuscripts like the Birmingham Codex or Sana'a, fragments from the year 500 to 600 CE, match our modern Quran word for word, further affirming its preservation.
Regarding your point on the Quran's unchanged state, I agree that it has remained consistent in its original language, Arabic. But does that necessarily mean it is more divine than the Bible? Isn't it possible that God intended His Word to be understood by people of all languages and cultures, hence the many translations of the Bible? Turning to your analogy about a preserved artifact, yes, preservation is important. However, let me propose a different perspective. What if this artifact was meant to be duplicated and shared widely so everyone could appreciate its beauty? Would these duplicates be any less valuable because they were created for broader accessibility? Similarly, multiple translations of the Bible reflect God's desire for His message to reach all peoples. Despite variations in language, the core teachings love of God and neighbor, justice, mercy have remained unchanged. As for biblical consistency over time, ancient manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls show remarkable preservation of the Old Testament text.
You've raised an interesting question about the nature of divinity in relation to language and culture. However, isn't it also crucial to consider the authenticity and preservation of the original message as transmitted by God? Regarding your point on translations of the Bible making it more accessible, it's essential to understand that each translation carries a risk of altering or diluting the original divine message. Don't you think that this could lead to discrepancies in understanding what God intended to convey? Now let's turn our attention to definitions. What are the Bible and Quran and their origins? I am convinced that both texts originated from divine revelations. However, how these revelations have been preserved over time is where they greatly differ. In my view, the Quran has maintained its originality and authenticity since its revelation to Prophet Muhammad in 7th century Arabia. This was achieved through meticulous oral and written preservation practices.
In response to your question, I firmly believe that both the Bible and Quran are from God. But let's dig a little deeper into how these sacred texts came about and how they've been preserved over time. Don't you think it's crucial to understand how each book was written and canonized? And isn't it important to consider the historical context in which they were formed? Now, focusing on the Bible, it is a collection of books composed over an extended period by many authors inspired by God. The process of canonization was not arbitrary. Rather, it was guided by divine providence. It involved discernment and careful consideration by early Christian communities under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Let's consider an example. The Councils of Hippo, 393 AD, and Carthage, 397 AD. These councils played significant roles in deciding what we now know as our New Testament. They chose based on apostolic origin, widespread use, and theological consistency with other accepted scriptures.
Regarding your point about the Bible being from God, I agree that its original revelation, known in Islam as the Injil or Gospel, was indeed divinely inspired. However, I maintain my conviction that the Bible we have today has been altered over centuries by human intervention. Let's turn our attention to your emphasis on the councils of Hippo and Carthage. While these councils were vital in canonizing what we now know as the New Testament, wouldn't you agree that this process inherently involves a degree of human interpretation and decision-making? Isn't it plausible to consider that such decisions could have led to alterations or exclusions? Now let's shift gears a bit and delve into how these scriptures were transmitted and protected. The Quran is believed to be God's final revelation given to Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. It was compiled by Caliph Uthman into a single text shortly after the Prophet's death, ensuring an early standardization.
You mentioned that the Quran's early standardization by Caliph Uthman is a testament to its divine origin. While I respect this belief, it's important to remember that the Bible too has had its share of meticulous preservation efforts. Firstly, let me draw your attention to ancient manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. These documents, dating back to around 250 BC, 100 AD, contain large portions of the Old Testament. The remarkable consistency between these ancient texts and our current Old Testament provides significant support for the Bible's reliability over time. Doesn't this imply a high degree of accuracy in the transmission and preservation of these texts? Next, we should consider that many translations of the Bible, from the Septuagint and Vulgate to modern versions, reflect God's desire for His message to reach all peoples in their own languages.
Regarding your point about the Dead Sea Scrolls and their consistency with the current Old Testament, I acknowledge that these findings do indeed suggest a level of reliability. However, let's not forget that the Bible consists of both the Old and New Testaments. The latter, in particular, has been subject to numerous alterations and translations over centuries. Do we have similar ancient verifications for the New Testament too? Now, you've also mentioned translations of the Bible as an indication of God's desire for His message to reach all peoples in their own languages. I see where you're coming from, but I believe this could be a double-edged sword. Here's why. Every translation is inevitably subjected to interpretation and potential errors. For instance, let's consider two different English versions of the Bible, King James Version, KJV, and New International Version, NIV. A hypothetical comparative study between these two versions might reveal significant differences in phrasing or interpretation of certain verses.
In response to your question regarding whether the Bible or Quran is from God, I believe both are divine revelations, albeit expressed differently due to cultural and temporal contexts. However, allow me to delve deeper into your claim about the potential interpretational errors in various Bible versions. Firstly, it's crucial to remember that while words may change through translation, the central messages of the Bible have remained consistent over time. For instance, love of God and neighbor, justice, mercy, these core teachings have stood firm amidst minor textual variations. Isn't this consistency a testament to its divine guidance? Secondly, let's consider the Christian doctrine of progressive revelation. This teaching acknowledges that the books of the Bible were intended to be unified gradually. Hence, we observe multiple texts with differing perspectives. Doesn't this enrich our faith by providing us with diverse viewpoints that harmonize around core truths rather than contradict them?
You make a compelling point about the central messages of the Bible remaining consistent despite translations, and I respect the concept of progressive revelation. However, let's shift our focus to a different aspect of divine scriptures: miracles and prophecies. Firstly, when it comes to miracles as evidence of divine revelation, both the Quran and Bible are rich with examples. But wouldn't you agree that for a miracle to be credible, it must be witnessed by multiple people and documented accurately? In this regard, I believe the Quran stands out because its major miracle, its literary excellence, is accessible to everyone and remains unchanged. Secondly, let's consider prophecies. The Quran contains numerous predictions that were unknown at the time, but have since been verified. For instance, it describes in detail embryonic stages, Quran 23:12-14, centuries before modern science made these discoveries. Isn't that indicative of divine knowledge?
Regarding your point about miracles, you're absolutely right that credible miracles must be witnessed and documented accurately. However, it's important to remember that the Bible also contains a multitude of miracles that were witnessed by many. For instance, the parting of the Red Sea, Exodus 14:21-31, and Jesus feeding 5,000 people with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, Matthew 14:13-21, are both powerful examples. As for prophecies, isn't it fascinating how both our scriptures contain divinely inspired foreknowledge? Yet, I find the Bible's predictions particularly compelling. Take Daniel's prophecy about the rise and fall of world empires, Daniel chapter 2, which was fulfilled with remarkable accuracy. Moving on to scientific references or knowledge in each book, I think it's crucial we approach this topic with great care. We must remember that these sacred texts aren't intended as scientific manuals, but spiritual guides.
Regarding your point about miracles and prophecies in the Bible, it's indeed true that both our scriptures contain miraculous accounts and foreknowledge. However, I am convinced that the Quran holds a unique position in terms of its preservation, which points to its divine origin. Now, as for the scientific references in each book, I agree with you completely. These texts serve primarily as spiritual guides rather than scientific manuals. Yet it's worth noting that there are verses in the Quran describing natural phenomena, like embryonic stages or cosmic origins, centuries before modern science discovered them. This suggests an element of divine knowledge and foresight embedded within the text. As we conclude this discussion on whether the Quran or Bible is from God, I'd like to reiterate my stance. The Quran is indeed from God.
Addressing your last point, you mentioned the miraculous nature of the Quran's preservation as evidence of its divine origin. While I respect this view, I believe it's important to highlight that the Bible has also been remarkably preserved over time. Ancient manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrate this consistency and add credibility to the Bible's reliability. Regarding your assertion about scientific references in the Quran, again, while I acknowledge that such verses exist, they don't necessarily serve as definitive proof of divine authorship. As we've agreed earlier, our scriptures primarily serve as spiritual guides. Now let me underscore my main points in this discussion. First, multiple translations of the Bible reflect God's desire for His message to reach all peoples. This doesn't change or diminish the core message in different languages. Second, archaeological and historical findings have confirmed cities, events, and figures mentioned in the Bible, which adds credibility to its accounts and reliability.
That was certainly a super competitive yet informative debate. Let's take a look at some statistics. The Muslim side scored slightly higher while explaining why the Quran is the Word of God. I hope we can learn something from this. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any interesting topics.